Well, I hope you liked that intro we did, or I did. It's only me, but it's great stuff, man. Basil Poliadoris is a great soundtrack artist, and I think Conan was probably the best thing he ever did. And I hope you enjoyed the artwork that I was able to get to you there. A lot of great artists did a lot of great covers, and believe me, there are a lot of artists that didn't even make it on here. And I'm sorry to say that, but just only got so much time and room for stuff. But it's great stuff. If you ever want to get some great artwork, man, check out the Savage Sword of Conans, the Savage Tales, and a lot of the Conan, regular Conan from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and even now. So it's really good stuff. But anyway, my name is JW, and this is JW's Old Comic Corner, and this is issue number 2. So, welcome. I hope you saw number 1. If not, I ask you to go ahead and take a look at it. Let me know what you think. And I also ask you when this is over, if you get through it all with me, let me know what you think. But I do want to do a shout out to Kelly Jones. He did the black and white piece that was in those inside the intro. That was not a cover. That was something he did for me back when he was a very young man, and before he became a big and famous artist. So, Kelly, if you're watching this, shout out to you, buddy. I miss you. So anyway, what this is about briefly, and then we'll get on to the show, is I'm here to talk about old comics, and only old comics, no new comics. And I'm going to be dealing with a lot of stuff, probably 2015 and under, somewhere in that area. That's pretty much when I stopped collecting new stuff. But I also want to invite you to take a look at other old comic books. If you're a collector, and I hope there are still some of you out there, we're disappearing, we're becoming an extinct breed pretty soon. I know we're endangered, but I still love reading comics and, looking at them and stuff, even after 50, 60 years of doing this stuff. But anyway, I just want to let you know that, you need to look around. There are a lot of good stuff out there. There's like thousands of old comic books that are not being picked up. A lot of people don't pick them up. They don't want to spend the money, or they're not sure what's in it and stuff. So I'm kind of hoping I can help you out by showing you some stuff. Different artists, different creators, artists, writers, characters, good and bad. And I'm hoping I can entice you to maybe start looking outside the box a little bit that you might be in. Because you can find a lot of the stuff fairly cheap. You can go to like Goodwill, thrift stores, swap meets, garage sales, and even a lot of comic book stores now have a lot of old books that they can't sell, so they sell them for cheap, $1, $2 each. If you go in a store, you can find dollar boxes usually of stuff. And inside there's some really good stuff. My old store I used to work at A1 Comics in Sacramento, they always had 50-cent boxes. And the stuff isn't like mint shaped, so you're not going to make like a ton of money. But if you want a good read, there's a lot of great stuff in there. Stuff from like the 70s, 80s, 90s, So I recommend that you take a look at those when you get in there. Give them a hard look. I think you'll find stuff that might actually intrigue you. Especially if you like reading comics and looking at them. Because like I say, the artists and writers do a lot of work, a lot of hard work at times to make these things. And it's definitely worth looking at and reading. So anyway, real briefly, I just want to tell you this. My show here is broken up into 3 parts. The first part is I call it characters, where I'm going to pull out heroes and villains and even maybe some what I call non-essential characters that play big roles in these comic books. And I'll do that as the first part. Second part, I'm going to pick out artists and writers. It'll be an artist one week, maybe a writer the next week, who I think needs to be talked about, and show you the material that they work on. Third part will be what I call a series or segment of series type thing, where I'm going to pull out small sections of comics or a mini series or series that only went 4 or 5 issues or 6 issues, and I'm going to show them to you, and I'm going to talk about them, and hopefully we can intrigue you to maybe give it a try. And so that's pretty much what my vision of this being. And I got to tell you, I'm not real good at this. I've learned how to do all this, thanks to my son who's helped me. And so it's not going to be, a real high-tech type of thing, but I'm more concerned about getting you the information that would make comic collecting hopefully a lot more fun and enjoyable for you. And just remember, I collected comics since I was 6, and I'm over 60. And A lot of books I never bought for investment. I bought books and read them and didn't take care of my early ones, but as I got older, I took care of them and they became worth money. And I believe that any books you get, if you take care of them, especially if they're in great shape, you got to give them time. And in time, they may be worth something. I don't know. Only the future can tell. So anyway, I thank you again for trying this out, and I'm going to go ahead and cut away to our first segment, which is our featured character. Thank you. See you then. Hi. This week's character for this podcast is going to be a hero, and it's going to be Magnus Robot Fighter. This will be Magnus Robot Fighter, the first one from Gold Key back in the 60s, back when I was a wee lad and actually got to see one of these. But just exactly who is this Magnus Robot Fighter? Some of you may are familiar with him with Valiant, the later issues like Valiant and Dark Horse and Future. He's been in everything in the Future. But this is all on Gold Key. Magnus Robot Fighter 1 came out in February of 1963 in a company called Gold Key. His original run, would go from issue 1 to number 28. It would then go into reprint from number 29 through 47, which was in the 70s when it finally ended. In the early 80s, Gold Key I think was still Gold Key. It may have been Whitman Books then, but they were running a new Dr. Solar, and they initially was putting a backup series with him in it, but they went out of business long after that. So anyway, after that it disappeared until like the 90s when Valiant showed up and got the rights to do the book. The covers I thought were really cool when I was a kid because they were all painted. Back in the 60s, everything was line art. There's a couple of line art covers in here, but overall they're all painted. And I thought that was really neat. And they were basically a painter called George Wilson would paint over the cover art sketching of Russ Manning, who was the interior artist and also wrote scripts for the comic book itself up through issue like 21, I think 1 or 2 later after that. But the issue 1, which is right below me, you see him like tagging the robot with the young lady underneath, crying in fear. Is his origin and first appearance, and you'll find out that I think it was strictly a science fiction book. It wasn't really super heavily superpowered or anything like that. You'll find out that he really had no superpowers. He was physically super strong, like a Captain America type thing, or maybe even a little bit stronger. He was also a genius. He was very, very smart. He created all sorts of stuff in here to defeat the evil robots. He was also physically able to pick up radio communications between robots when they were talking or communicating with themselves or with their masters or something. But anyway, he was taught to fight and destroy robots that went rogue or are being used by evil people to hurt mankind, usually do the usual thing in the 60s, which was to take over everything. His origin's pretty simplistic. He was raised as an infant by a robot called 1A, and 1A was a robot, one of the original robots that were created years before, and he had independent artificial intelligence. He was a free-thinking robot, and who still believed in, I guess, basically the laws of Isaac Asimov. Robots shall not hurt mankind or let mankind be hurt, etc., etc. And he took it seriously, and so he fought some stuff in the past by himself. But now he figured he needed a human companion to join him in protecting mankind, because mankind at this time was becoming more, I don't want to call it lazy, but dependent upon robots. And as such, we were becoming probably weaker. We can't defend ourselves as well. Our armies are robots, that type of thing. They did our cooking. They drove us everywhere. They basically started taking care of a lot of us. And so, A1 felt he needed to have somebody to be there that was, recognizable as a human. So he had a child, an infant child that he trained and kind of physically altered him a little bit, like with the powers I told you before. But his main training and his main fighting ability, besides those powers, was, which I thought was cool back in the 60s, early 60s, because you didn't hear much about this stuff, like karate, judo, and other forms of fighting like that. There was really not much talk of martial arts back in these forms. This is way before Bruce Lee ever got famous and gave us martial arts. But I will show you right here a few examples of artwork that shows his fighting. And you'll see that he mainly uses his hands and takes for the neck and stuff. But he is strong enough to pick up robots and throw them, do things like that. So it was pretty fun. I do recommend it. That if you look at the artwork, it's by Russ Manning, the artworks that I chose. And he's a very good artist, very good for his time. But again, if you want to know what the world was like, you kind of want to you ever see the Disney movie called Wall-E, with the robot on the desert planet, and he eventually goes on board a ship, and you find there's fat, lazy humans that don't do anything, the robots take care of them. Well, this one's kind of similar to that, except that they're not fat, lazy humans, they're just, kind of letting the robots do everything while they do nothing except enjoy themselves. And what happens is you will find that the evil people involved in this are usually humans or some aliens from outer space that want to take over mankind, or just robots that go rogue. They get individual AI and hate humans for subjugating them or using them for, I guess, slave labor. You'll find that the girl, like in the front cover there, her name is Legia Klein, and she becomes Magnus Robot Fighter's girlfriend and eventually his wife. And she is the daughter of a powerful man called Senator Klein. And Senator Klein befriends Magnus through his daughter, and Magnus finds out that North M is this gigantically large floating city, and above North America. And it's like everything else. It's got levels of monetary gain, I guess. I don't know if that's the correct word, but several levels. Rich people live at the top. As you go down, it gets poorer and poorer until you get to ground level, and there's a lot of poor people there and stuff. So anyway, Senator Klein befriends Magnus, and Magnus starts to learn through the issues to befriend other people, and they understand that robots need to be watched and that he is their person to take care of these problems. But you also find out that he had a limited rogues gallery because he only won 28 issues. His main people were a criminal called Zirkol, Talpa, Dr. Laszlo Noel, and Dr. Zen Arbon. Those were pretty much the main villains that showed up. They had some other ones that show up, but they were one-shot guys usually. These guys kept showing up all the time. But I really enjoyed this series. It was fun because it was different than superhero stuff. And when I was a young man in 1964 when this started coming out, I could never find any of these. I actually traded a kid when I was in the doctor's office getting shots for poison oak, getting some shots in the old Tukis down there to get rid of it. I traded some toys I had for an issue of this and an issue of Turok, Son of Stone, because I thought the covers were cool. And it took me forever. I didn't really fill out my runs and stuff until like the 70s when I was collecting old comics. Because I really enjoyed the Russ Manning art. And the stories are 60s science fiction, Star Trek, Time Tunnel, Lost in Space, kind of simplistic stories, but they were fun. It was very entertaining and very different than Superman and Fantastic Four and that type of stuff. And for years, this stuff has been dirt cheap. I mean, you just cannot find a lot of this stuff. I mean, you can find it, but, usually most people never wanted any of it. And so I was able to pick up a lot of them fairly cheap. They're all in probably very good shape. I don't think I have anything mint because I didn't care. I wanted to read them. I enjoyed them. And I do highly recommend, if you have read the newer Magnus, I would recommend, checking this out and enjoying it because you can see the origins and stuff and enjoy the art and enjoy the stories. Like I say, they're period pieces, kind of like watching Star Trek. You watch it and you go, yeah, like today this wouldn't work. But you know what? It does work. It's still fun to read, and I do recommend it. You can find later on in like the year 2000 and something, Dark Horse got the rights to do the comic on limited basis, but they also reprinted the first 21 issues in 3 books. And you can still get those on Amazon and stuff. Dark Horse no longer has the rights to it, I don't think. and I think the books went out of print. So you may have to look on like eBay, maybe some used bookstores or used bookstores online, because they carry a lot of this stuff. And I hope that if you get a chance, if you're out snooping around in Goodwill or something, you see a bunch of comics, see a couple of these magnets, or if you're in a comic store and you see a dollar box, you go in there, the reprints are really cheap. Pick one up, take a peek, see what you think, because a lot of the reprints carried these covers on it. So I hope you'll give it a try and let me know what you think. If you think they stink, that's fine. I'm willing to hear that. If you like them, I hope you do, because it's really fun to read. So give it a try if you get a chance when you see one. All right. So thank you for watching this, and I'll be on to the next segment. I'm sorry, a little stutter there. Hi. This week we're going to be doing the Writer of the Week. This is a writer that I didn't know a whole lot about, even though obviously after doing all my research, I found out that I love this guy, man. He was a great writer, especially for a young man in the 60s. He wrote tons of stuff that I loved. And I'm hoping that when I get done that maybe you'll recognize some of the titles and then maybe even go back and try them. A lot of them are in reprint form now. His name is Arnold Drake, and he has quite a career. I guarantee you, me researching this, I couldn't even begin to tap into a lot of the stuff that he has done. I mainly looked up for things that would be familiar with a lot of comic collectors out there, and hopefully future comic collectors. Arnold Drake was born in 1924 to a Manhattan furniture dealer, and grew up a fairly normal life in that place. At the age of 12, he decided he wanted to start drawing comics, so I assume he was collecting some of them back in those days. Unfortunately, he contracted scarlet fever and was confined to a bed for a year. Man, what a bummer that must have been, laying there waiting to do something. But in an interview later on, he stated that as he lay there waiting to get better, the artwork that he envisioned he wanted to do kept getting smaller and smaller, and the word balloons got bigger and bigger. In other words, he lost interest in art, maybe due to the fact that he couldn't probably do it, maybe, I don't know. But he obviously got into writing, and I gotta tell you, I'm glad he did, because I thought he was one hell of a writer for his time. So anyway, this did lead to him to becoming a writer as he got older. He studied later on as journalism at the University of Missouri and later at New York University. And from there, he embarked on his career. And it is believed that his first public work that he did was It Rhymes with Lust, under the name of Drake Waller. This was what's called a proto-graphic novel comics magazine that sold on newsstands in 1950. You'll see a photo here. Later, he met a neighbor of one of his brothers, who it turns out was Bob Kane of Batman fame. And Kane liked what Drake was doing and collaborated on a few projects. And then Kane later on introduced him to the editors at DC Comics. His first DC work was an 8-page story in Batman number 98, The Return of Mr. Future. He began scripting all sorts of stories all across different genres at DC at that point. Showcase number 1, very important series, Fireman Feral. Tommy Tomorrow, Adventures of Bob Hope, Adventures of Jerry Lewis, House of Secrets, Space Ranger and the Tales of the Unexpected, and even more that I can probably name here or even find. His biggest work, though, was when he started in 1962 with his friend Bob Haney. They discovered a comic company distributed by, I guess, from what I read, it was National Periodical Publications Independent News, and it was called Marvel Comics. They looked at some of this stuff as it came out and warned DC about them. But as we all know, DC didn't listen, and they kept doing the same stuff, which is fine with me as a kid growing up. But, Marvel was able to advance to become number one and has pretty much stayed there ever since then. In 1963, Drake was approached by DC to develop a feature for an anthology series they had called My Greatest Adventures. In My Greatest Adventures number 80, he created a group called the Doom Patrol. And I'm sure a lot of people are aware of the Doom Patrol. his Doom Patrol was pretty straight superhero stuff compared to the newer stuff that you're seeing on TV these days. But Drake wanted a feature that was similar in character development like Marvel, and so that's why Doom Patrol came to be. He would write this book until the book died out in issue number 121. And he would move on and move on to other things. But during this time, Drake would create such great books as Stanley and His Monster, premiered in Fox and Crow in number 95. He brought back the Plastic Man that DC acquired the rights to, I guess. Only ran issues 1 through 10. He then created one of DC's long-standing characters, though he only did one issue of it, I believe, which was 205, called Strange Adventures, and it featured a new character called Deadman. Great character, by the way. Neil Adams would grab a hold of it and later on and take it to great new heights. And to this day, he's still a very good character. He also did work on some of my favorite books I had in the 60s. They were Challengers of the Unknown. And he started doing that with number 18 and did most of them till about number 63. Did a few Batman books, some Black Hawk books, 196 to 198. Did Phantom Stranger in like, I think, 75, number 27 through 34 and number 37. And he just did a bunch of other miscellaneous work. He also decided to do a little freelance work with that company he warned DC about called Marvel. And he started with doing the original Captain Marvel number 5 up through 12 in 68 and 69. And he would later also during that time do a book called Marvel Superheroes number 18. He created the original Guardians of the Galaxy, done with great artwork by the great Gene Colan. And then he would do the following issue with a character called Kazar. And then later moved to Not Brand Ek, 11 through 13, one issue of Captain Savage, and then of course he did what probably my first Marvel work I ever read of his, which was X-Men, number 47 through 54. And there, I'm jealous. He got to work with Jim Steranko, who was doing a lot of work at Marvel at the time, and he also got to see the new artist from, I believe, Britain. I think he's from Britain, Barry Windsor Smith. He did one issue of it in his early days. It was great stuff. But he would leave Marvel after all this, and then he would go back to, not back to DC necessarily, but he went to a company called Gold Key and started creating some of their newer books. And he had done some of these books, I think, even earlier on than this, as I did my research. But some of the titles were like Grimm's Ghost Stories, an anthology horror book that he did for them. He also did Boris Karloff's Tales of Mystery. Also got on board to do Dark Shadows, later on with Star Trek, and then Twilight Zone, to name some. And then surprisingly, I found out that he did quite a long stint on a book called Little Lulu that Gold Key had. And that book's been around since the 40s. And he did like 215 and 231 upwards to 268. And then it was canceled because Gold Key disappeared after that. He also did one thing which I took a long time for me to find this. It was an anthology sci-fi comic book that ran 4 issues called Starstream. It was done under the Whitman brand, which is what Gold Key turned into. And that was a fun comic to read. It was all science fiction. And for me, it was hard to find all 4 issues, but I did find them. By 1981, Drake became an executive director of the Veterans Bedside Network, an organization through which actors, actresses, and sound engineers would perform scripted material to entertain patients in a Veterans Administration hospitals in the greater New York City area. I admire him for doing something like that. And he was still continuing to do stuff on and off. I couldn't find much on it, but what I did find was they believe his last known work was for DC called DC's GI Combat number 276, where he introduced a character called the GI Samurai. He did show up later. I don't know if this is true. I couldn't find anything on it really. In Heavy Metal Volume 26, number 6, with the story Tripping Out, illustrated by Luis Dominguez. After that, the only thing that I found was that DC was reprinting the Doom Patrol stuff, and he wrote a foreword for Doom Patrol Archives #1. And then afterward, when Dark Horse reprinted his very first work, It Rhymes with Lust. It was sad to say that he passed away in 2007. And in 2008, he was inducted posthumously with the Will Eisner Award for his work. And believe me, he deserved it with the amount of work that he did, and as much as it was fun to read it. I found out during this time he wrote 2 movie screenplays. Whether they got made or not, I don't know. Called The Flesh Eaters in '64 and Who Killed Teddy Bear in 1966. He also wrote some lyrics with his brother for a book I think that his brother was working on called The Oils of Araby in 1980. I will say that, Arnold Drake had, I thought, quite a career. Much bigger and vaster than I thought it was when I started this. And I loved it because he worked on so many books that I personally loved and wanted to collect. Challenge of the Unknown, Blackhawks, Doom Patrol, one of my favorite books. My favorite X-Men that got me into Marvel, which was reading these when I was in school, when I was a young man. I got to read some from a friend of mine. A lot of this stuff is reprinted, more than I thought, especially the Gold Key stuff. I think Hermes Press at one point started reprinting a lot of this material. So if you want to find it, it's out there. I think it's out of print, some of it, because I was looking at some of it, and it's pretty expensive. But it's fun to read. It's time dated, especially the TV material and stuff like that. But it was still, it's still very, very much fun to read, and I definitely recommend it. If you're looking to find this stuff, again, as I always say in every broadcast, if you look around, you might be able to find a lot of this stuff. A lot of it got reprinted in their comic books themselves for later issues when they stopped making new material. And you can find all this stuff in like dollar boxes at comic stores, Goodwills, garage sales, pawn stores. You look, any of those places that sell a lot of older stuff that people just don't want anymore. You might find some stuff like that. If you do, I do highly recommend doing it. And so I just hope you enjoyed what you saw and maybe piqued your interest a little bit to try some of this stuff. If you can, I'd do it. Like I said, you might find it fairly cheap because most of this is not mainstay stuff that people collect. So to Arnold Drake, wherever you're at, thank you, man. You gave me some of my favorite things that I collected in the 60s. And I really appreciate the hard work you went and put in this stuff together. And I hope that some people will grab onto some of this and maybe get some interest in it and keep your name alive and your legacy alive in comic books. And with that, please honor him and read it if you can. And I thank you. And we'll go on now to our next feature. And thank you. Hi everybody, welcome to Old Comic Recommendations. You'll notice behind me that I'm in a different room. I decided to move out to the garage, got a new computer that's much better than the ones in the other room, and I can't afford to get the other ones fixed up right now. So I'm out here doing it here in the garage with my comic collection, which is behind me. And I have a quite extensive collection at that, and I'm working on them. So anyway, this week on Old Comic Recommendations, we're going to be talking about the JLA Avengers crossover. And this crossover came out in September of 2003 to March of 2004. The writer was Kurt Busiek, great writer by the way. Artist, of course, the phenomenal George Perez, and I believe it was inked by George Perez. To me, this is one of the greatest team-up books that were done out of all the Marvel DC crossovers. And I'm not besmirching the other ones. They were great too. I enjoyed all of them. But this one had a lot of fun in it because you had the two biggest super groups going against each other and then eventually working with each other. During this time, I'm going to be showing pages from the book, artwork from the book, things like that. I'll also have some other pages from the unfinished project that was 20 years ago, approximately 20 years ago or so. So anyway, on with it. This is the second time that this book is being done. The first time was tried back in late 1982, and it was kind of a mess. It became a mess. It started off with good intentions, and then it kind of fell apart. I believe it was both sides that caused this problem. I mean, no one can really stand up and take ownership of it. I just think it's either a clash of the egos or it's a clash of the companies or whatever it was. I really don't care, because we were denied a different storyline. Same artist. The original writer was Gary Conway, and the artist was George Perez. They didn't list an inker. So I'm putting it as George has possibly inking it himself too, because he is a pretty talented inker. The book was supposed to be a one-shot that was 64 pages. So, like I say, the project just went through him and that. They did this, they did that. We're not going to do this, we're not going to do that. And eventually, by May of '84, it was officially canceled. During that time, George Perez did draw 21 pages of artwork from it. And those pages were later on, after it was canceled, given to George Perez. And I'm showing them here. I'm going to be showing you some of the pages here from the book, because inside the limited edition book, which I held up the cover to, they have this. And this gives you the artwork that George Perez drew back in 1983. Excuse me. Anyway, later on, George, from what I read, sold the pages to Rob Liefeld, who I think leaked them out or let them get leaked out, or he showed them that, they later came on the internet, because you can find some of them on there. Or you can buy this book, which unfortunately is a limited run book. So anyway, 20 years later, the project is then brought up, and it is approved this time by both companies. The writer now is Kurt Busiek, with George Perez drawing and inking this series. And I was so thankful to see George Perez drawing it. And actually, I was very thankful Kurt Busiek wrote it, because he's a very talented writer. If you ever get a chance, I recommend looking up some of his better stuff. Did some Avengers, did some DC stuff. He also did a great alternate series I highly recommend called Astro City. But anyway, I was working in a very popular comic book store in Sacramento, California called A1 Comics. Shameless plug there. And when it came out, that thing sold like hotcakes. I'm serious, man. We blew up the first issue and the second issue within days, because no one ever orders enough of this stuff, because we're never quite sure what happens with it. Is it going to be good or is it going to be bad? But we managed to get it, and people loved it. They just loved it. And again, because a lot of people talked about was George Perez's fantastic artwork in it. This artwork was just beautiful, and this guy loves to draw as many heroes in a story as he can. I'm telling you, if you get this book, you're going to see almost virtually every character, and even villains that both sides had, Marvel and DC, are in this in some form. And I loved it. It was like the phenom to read at the time. But anyway, Kurt Busiek, of course, did the story. Guy's smart. He's a very good storyteller. He knows his stuff, and he shows it when he writes these stories. So I'm going to give you a little tidbit about it and a little idea. I'm not going to tell you about the whole thing. This story begins with two universes dying. One in the Marvel Universe, one in the DC Universe. The Marvel Universe, a lot of you people probably won't recognize. I don't think this character has shown up anytime recently. It's the universe that had a character called Archon, who I always felt was kind of a Conan-type character. He stole, I think he threw lightning bolts of power and stuff. He fought the Avengers in like the 60s, maybe 70s at some point. He was there to get a power source and another reason later on for something else. Anyway, over there in that one, you find out that he is with, either married or a consort or whatever, a superhero, I think came from the Thing comic books, called Thundra. Anyway, they're in this universe, and then something happens, they go outside, they're going to go fight it, and they're gone. That simple. Whole universe out of here. Alright, the next universe that dies, I was really kind of sorry to see again, was the universe that has the Crime Syndicate in it. Alright, and they're doing their usual bad things of conquering worlds and just having a great time doing it too, Hate to ruin people's fun like that. But anyway, they look up and all of a sudden there's this big giant effect going on, and all of a sudden they're gone. Now the Crime Syndicate, for those who don't know who they are, they have Ultraman, which is an evil Superman. They have Superwoman, which is probably a cross between Supergirl and Wonder Woman. They have Johnny Quick, which is the Flash. They have Owlman, which is Batman and Power Ring. Well, they all died back in Crisis on Infinite Earths #1. So in this one, they died in this universe too. So I don't know, maybe in the next universe they might last longer. But what we see then after that is we see a Marvel villain, that I think. I'm not sure if he's really a villain or not. He seems like he does some stuff for the good of everybody, but he's called the Grandmaster. His claim to fame was the first Contest of Champions miniseries, which was a pretty good series back then. And he's kind of like a chess master. He always wants to bet against things. He's like a gigantic gambler with a lot of power. He was also, I think, in the Avengers movies. He ends up meeting an alien being. He's this big blue guy. And his name is called Krona, and he is an ex-guardian of the guardian of the universe, from the Owens, who create the Green Lantern Corps. He's one of them guys, except he's not a little short dude. Here he's a big tall guy. So anyway, this guy Krona, if you don't know his background, real briefly, he was part of the original Guardians, and he wanted to find out the origin of creation. Who created everything? All these alternate universes, everything. And he wants to find out. So he goes messing around with that and breaks a lot of Owen laws. And he gets in trouble, and he shows up now and then throughout time. But this time he's got enough power to do stuff. He's the one that destroyed those 2 universes I mentioned. So anyway, Krona and him meet each other, and they talk about what he's going to do, and Grandmaster's kind of looking at him like, holy smokes, this guy looks like he might be a powerful dude. And then it kind of just goes away from that, and the next scene you see is the Justice League of America is fighting an Avengers villain called Terminus. He's this big giant metal guy with the scepter and stuff. He likes to destroy things. He's an alien from outer space also. Anyway, the Avengers, or the JLA, take him down. He's disposed of, and they start wondering, like, who's he from? They analyze him and stuff, and I think they're trying to get to the bottom of it when the Grandmaster shows up. And he shows up telling them, you know what, guys? Your universe is in trouble. There's somebody going to destroy your whole universe. And I'm here from another universe with heroes, too, that want to stop this guy from destroying this one and the other universe, which, of course, is the Marvel. That's kind of paraphrasing a lot of it. But anyway, he goes, you have to go find these 12 mystical items, 6 of which they're mystical items in Marvel, and 6 are mystical items in DC. Now, if you're an old-timer like me and have read a lot of DC comics, you'll recognize probably all of the mystical items. So it's pretty fun. So then you flip over to the next universe, which is Marvel, and you see those guys fighting a big, giant, monster-sized, huge starfish. And if you don't know who the starfish is, then you didn't watch Suicide Squad #2, or you didn't read Brave and the Bold #28, where the Justice League fought Starro. And that's his name, Starro. So they fight him. It's really kind of fun to watch them react to the fact they get these little starfish in their face, and they stick, they get turned into mindless drones. It's kind of fun to read that. But anyway, they end up destroying him, or getting rid of him, I should say. You don't ever destroy Starro. They got rid of him and sent him back in outer space. So what happens is they get visited by a DC person called Metron. He's of the New God fame. And he comes over and tells them the same story that the Grandmaster tells him. Look, man, your universe is in trouble. We're going to all get killed, and the universe is destroyed. So we got to find these 12 mystical artifacts, and we got to get those and give them to me so we can get together and stop this catastrophe. So, again, both sides are meeting this with some skepticism, because it's a little hard to believe, this guy shows up out of nowhere. But anyway, that's how it starts, and this thing is fun to read. You're gonna like it. It's 4 books, to read, and just lots of things going on. I'll give you a couple of things that I thought was really cool in it that you can look forward to. First one is they have a scene where Darkseid gets a hold of the Infinity Gauntlet, because both Earths are going to merge together and things are starting to flip back and forth, and Darkseid finds the Infinity Gauntlet. Gee, I wonder what he does with that. And then next, they have a great scene where Krona finds out in the Marvel Universe who he needs to talk to, and who would that be? Galactus. And he goes to Galactus, and he starts demanding them to tell him stuff, and Galactus goes, you don't tell me what to do, dude. I'm Galactus. I'm the big cheese here. And then, you have to read on to see what happens in that little encounter. But my favorite thing in this of all, because I'm an old Superman fan, And I love Superman. Not new one, not so much anymore. He's not like the old one. The old one, up until about 10 years ago, I thought was a great hero. Anyway, what's happening is Superman ends up fighting Krona, and he has Thor's hammer, as you'll see in cover 4 and behind me or around me. He's holding Thor's hammer and has Captain America's shield because they're fighting together to get rid of Krona and stuff. And I thought that was awesome. Superman, Captain America in the past wielded Thor's hammer, and now here you got Superman. Because remember, only a person of inner good and trustworthiness and et cetera, can lift Thor's hammer. Well, Superman should be able to lift it, in my opinion. If Cap can lift it, Superman could do it too. And I thought that was cool. And like I say, you have to read later on to find out how that turns out. So it was great. I mean, it's a really fun read. There's so much stuff happening. It's just hitting you all the time with different things. And they end up going through time, changing the timelines, and they change crossovers. They do all sorts of things in there that I think you guys will just love. But anyway, things of note also that I thought was good story-wise, besides the awesome artwork. Kurt shows a lot of differences on the Earths. Marvel Earth versus DC Earths. And it's really fun to watch because on the DC Earth, the Avengers get there and they find out that they have a Flash museum here, or maybe a Superman museum. And look, people, they applaud and want these heroes when they fly overhead. They're like paid homage to almost. It's just, they look with awe and honor to these people. JLA ends up going to Marvel's Earth, and you know what? They look at him with awe, but they also look at him with, who the hell are these guys? What are they doing here? They got superpowers. What are we going to do? And it's almost like they're afraid initially before they prove themselves. And I thought that was really interesting, how the differences of the universes. This what always kept Marvel and DC kind of different, was how they portrayed their heroes. I thought it was really good that Kurt showed that. You'll find that certain cities don't exist on either universe. Mostly DC cities like Keystone City or Smallville, things like that. They're not on Marvel's Earth. So I thought that was kind of fun. But I like that. They had things in their brief differences about the team ups they create. They have one point where Flash versus Quicksilver. Who's really faster, Quicksilver or Flash? Well, Flash taps the Speed Force. Quicksilver gets his power from a mutant ability. Who would be faster? Who's stronger? Because Superman's up duking it out with Thor. Thor is a mystical being. He's magic, and Superman's vulnerable to magic. And Thor could probably knock him out with his hammer if he headshotted him. Who knows, right? But will Superman's heat vision destroy the magical hammer? Those are things that they kind of test a little bit. Of course, the best team up was Batman and Cap. They have to like fight each other and stuff, and later on maybe join each other. And what happens is, sorry, that was my alarm. I'm taking care of some books. Anyway, it's really fun to see what happens. So the fights were great, and the team-ups of these people in the further issues down are even better. The conversations between them and the time twists that follow were fun. I think Kurt really outdid himself because he knows both universes intimately well. I think George put in a gigantically great, stellar performance on the artwork. Now, you just cannot help but love to see this because this guy is so ultra detailed. I'm serious, man. I once read an article years ago where a guy said, I hate doing ink and George for it. I can't remember who it was because you gotta fill in like the cracks on the little bricks and everything. He doesn't skip a lot. He likes detail. He wants it to look perfect, I think, and he's a great artist. Now the Absolute Edition, which I haven't told you about, but there was an Absolute Edition that came out, and what happens is there's 2 books in it. The first book is the main story. It's a big thick book, and it just reprints the entire 4-part miniseries. Excellent books, oversized, makes it easy for old dudes like me to read, And the second book I thought which is why I bought it. It has the complete story of what happened 20 years ago when they first tried to do this. Because during that time, George Perez drew 21 pages that never got published. When they canceled the book, the pages went to George. Like I said, it goes to George, and he later sells them, I think, to Rob Liefeld, and then Rob Liefeld, I think, still has them. But they got reprinted in this book. They're all there, and they actually put the storyline. They run the plot with the pages so you can read what's going on. And then they tried to finalize the plot at the end, because I believe it was not finished at the time the book was canceled, because it never got off the ground to begin with. So they only had partial plot. But I think they have the rest of that. They have interviews. They have some articles about what happened and stuff. And just, it's an all-around fun read. I always try to buy these editions where they give you the extra stuff. It's kind of like me when I used to buy DVDs a lot. They put out the Ultimate Master Condition. Like, I got, my favorite one was Dawn of the Dead. Dawn of the Dead had 5 different cuts of the original Dawn of the Dead movie back in the 70s. And it's awesome because each cut is a little bit different. It's fun to watch if you can put up with five copies of that. So anyway, this book is very expensive. You go on eBay, people ask a lot of money for these 2 books, and it's in a slipcase, but it's worth it in my opinion if you're a geek and a nerd like me, because I love having this stuff. They also released a trade paperback not long after that, and the trade came out, sold extremely well. And at the comic shop I worked at, we sold out, kept reordering, and then all of a sudden it's gone, not published anymore, which is a shame. This is a book that I think is almost up, not quite into the Watchmen thing, but I think it's something that people can read and reread, because this is back, in my opinion, during the golden age of Avengers. Back Avengers and JLA. I think when both groups are at their best. So I do know that they did release a limited edition in 2022 this year, in homage to George Perez, who was ill, and I understand that book is now very hard to get and also very expensive. But the good news is you can still get the 4 comics. 4 comics, I've seen her selling around maybe $10 or so, maybe a little bit higher than that. But if you go on eBay, you can find sets of these and get a really good price, I'm sure, on Amazon or all the other places that you can get used books for and used comic books for. It's worth it. It's a worthwhile read. It's great. And I think this book is worth reading, and it's worth owning. I think it will be a timeless classic, and it still is. I read it after, 17, 18, 19 years or so, and it just reads wonderfully. It really is. So I'm going to end this by thanking George Perez and Kurt Busiek for finally giving me this. I waited so many years for this to come out, and you guys did a great job, and I thank you again for it. And so now we'll go next to my closing and end credits. I want to thank you for taking your time and watching my podcast. I do enjoy doing this. A little nerve-wracking at times because I'm doing pretty much everything on it, so I have a big learning curve to go through, especially on how to improve ways. I got to work on how to fix audio problems and stuff, and I'm hoping that I'll learn it and go on from that. But I do want to say that, again, the whole point of this for me is I want to try and introduce you to characters and books and stories and artists, writers, because the artists and writers, inkers, color, all those guys make up a comic book. And they're all important into what creates this great genre of comic books. So I hope you'll keep staying tuned and that you'll continue to watch as I make these. I hopefully will get better. There'll be changes almost every podcast as I figure out how to do more stuff with the editing tools and things like that. But it's still kind of fun, and I hope you guys can get something out of it. Like I say, you'll see my backgrounds every week will have characters that I've collected and enjoyed the most. Like this one has Cerebus, Captain Marvel, the Marvel one, Dr. Solar, Karate Kid, Batman, of course, Thor, Cyclops, and Hourman. And there'll be more coming up. And we'll go through a lot of these books. I'll find little things in there that you may want to hear about or I want you to hear about. And hopefully you'll find some joy in it. And just remember that there are a lot of old comics out there. And if you're lucky enough to have a comic book store in your area that carries old comics, you'll find that a lot of them are fairly cheap. Because a lot of people don't collect them. They want to go ahead and get stuff that's going to be worth $1 million later on. Well, you know what? That's probably not going to happen for a long time. I have a vast collection behind me, and I've been collecting since I was 6. And I was lucky enough to work in a comic store later on in my life and own a comic store. But I never bought comics for investment. I bought it because of the love of the genre. I just loved reading them. I loved the superheroes. I loved everything about them. The stories, the writing, the artwork. It was all important to me to collect. And like I say, I waited, God, what am I, 60? It took 60 years for my collection to be worth something. And again, that was not the important part. The important part for me was the reading and the enjoyment of just sitting down, turning off all the internet and everything else. Just read a handful of comics and just enjoy them for what they are. And I hope I can find people that can still do that. And yes, you can make money off investments. But I firmly believe that investments takes time. And if you take care of your books and, keep them safe, and then give it time. So when you become an old dude like me, they might be worth some money. You might be able to sell them and buy that RV you always wanted, perhaps, or maybe a new computer or something like I need. So anyway, with that, I'm going to say thank you again, and I hope we'll see you on the next one. So stay tuned. There will be more coming. All right. Thank you again.
Stronger than a whale, he can swim anywhere.
He can breathe underwater and go flying through the air. The Joe Submariner, Chris Silvertip, will be very heavy demon.
For sailor of Atlantis is the Prince